The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus Brent cleared his throat. He stood at the head of the conference table, his expensive suit catching the afternoon sun streaming through the glass walls. I'd seen that expression before, the carefully practiced smile of a man about to deliver a blow he'd already justified to himself. "Leonard," he said, his voice carrying that false warmth reserved for bad news, "we need to discuss the future of TechCore's operations division." My stomach tightened. 23 years. I'd given this company 23 years of my life, and I knew what came next before he even said it. "As you know, we've been restructuring to meet the demands of a rapidly evolving market. After careful consideration, the board and I have decided to bring in fresh leadership for the systems architecture department." Fresh leadership, the corporate euphemism for replacement. "I'd like to introduce Raina Brent, who will be taking over your position effective immediately." She walked in then, his wife, wearing a tailored dress and confidence that only comes from never having to earn your place. Our eyes met briefly. Hers held triumph. Mine held something else, recognition of a pattern I should have seen forming months ago. The room felt smaller suddenly. The other executives shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable but silent. No one would defend me. No one ever does when power makes its decision. "Leonard's been an invaluable asset," Marcus continued, his words hollow. "But TechCore needs to move faster, think bigger. Raina brings a fresh perspective that aligns with our vision for aggressive expansion." Fresh perspective. She'd worked in marketing at a boutique firm for 3 years. I'd built every critical system holding TechCore together since we were 15 people operating out of a converted garage. "Your transition will be smooth," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "We're offering a generous severance package, 6 months. Salary, full benefits through the year. 6 months to replace 23 years. I opened the folder. The numbers meant nothing. They couldn't quantify the nights I'd spent debugging code while my daughter learned to walk without me there. They couldn't measure the anniversaries missed, the family dinners cut short, the slow erosion of my marriage until my wife finally stopped waiting. "This is effective when?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Today," Raina answered before Marcus could. "We need to move quickly. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. My name is Leonard Whitford, and I'm the architect of something no one at TechCore truly comprehends. Not Marcus with his MBA and inherited connections, certainly not Raina with her undergraduate degree in communications and her talent for choosing the right husband. I started at TechCore in 2002 when the company was bleeding money and credibility. The dot-com crash had devastated the industry, and we were 3 months from bankruptcy. Marcus's father, the original founder, hired me with a handshake and a promise. "Survive this and you'll have a home here for life." Promises made by dying men don't transfer to their sons. I built what I called the neural framework, a distributed system architecture that allowed TechCore to scale infinitely while maintaining zero downtime. Every transaction, every data point, every client interaction flowed through pathways I'd designed with obsessive precision. But the real genius wasn't visible on any organizational chart. Embedded within the neural framework were authentication protocols requiring my biometric signature for critical operations. It wasn't ego that drove me to build it this way. It was survival instinct learned during the early years when competitors tried to poach our systems, when hostile investors attempted takeovers, when the company teetered on the edge repeatedly. The protocols were my insurance policy, designed to prevent unauthorized system changes that could destroy years of careful architecture. They were also, I realize now, my final safeguard. Every major client contract TechCore signed contained embedded verification requirements, digital handshakes that confirmed system integrity through my authenticated credentials. The clients never knew these protocols existed. Their lawyers approved boilerplate language I'd carefully crafted over the years, language that seemed standard, but created dependencies only I understood. The supply chain management system that coordinated TechCore's global operations, built on frameworks requiring my authorization for significant modifications. The financial reconciliation software that processed billions in quarterly transactions. Integrated with security certificates bearing my digital signature. The disaster recovery systems that protected TechCore from catastrophic data loss? Configured to validate against authentication, keys I'd personally encrypted. I'd given TechCore 23 years. In return, I'd woven myself so deeply into its infrastructure that removing me would be like removing a spine and expecting the body to stand. Marcus didn't know this because he'd never cared to understand how anything actually worked. He saw results on quarterly reports and assumed they materialized through the vague magic of technology. He collected accolades at conferences while I solved the crises that would have destroyed his reputation. Raina knew even less. She'd spent her career creating PowerPoint presentations and attending networking events. She thought leadership meant issuing directives and expecting compliance. They were about to learn a lesson that cannot be taught, only experienced. Marcus made the transition public, with the kind of ceremony designed to erase me from TechCore's history. He gathered the entire company, over 2,000 employees, in the main atrium for an exciting announcement about TechCore's future. I stood off to the side while he praised Raina's innovative thinking and bold vision. He spoke about embracing change and moving beyond legacy systems. Every word was aimed at me, rewriting history to cast my contributions as obstacles rather than foundations. Some people build companies, Marcus declared, his voice echoing off glass and steel I'd helped pay for. Others just maintain them. TechCore needs builders. The applause that followed felt like a physical blow. These were people I'd mentored, protected during layoffs, covered for during failures. Now they clapped as Marcus handed my career to his wife like a wedding gift. Raina took the microphone with practiced ease. I'm excited to bring TechCore into the modern era. We've been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change. That ends today. Outdated thinking. The systems keeping their paychecks flowing, their clients satisfied, their operations running smoothly. All outdated. She didn't mention me by name. She didn't have to. Everyone understood who she meant. Security escorted me out an hour later, not dramatically, not with handcuffs or accusations. Just a polite request to pack my personal items while 2 guards watched to ensure I didn't compromise company assets. 23 years fit into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos of my daughter at various ages, a coffee mug from our first major client win, a few books I'd kept meaning to read. The walk through the building was silent. Conversations stopped as I passed. Eyes looked away. One junior developer, a kid I'd hired straight out of college, mouthed, "I'm sorry," when his manager wasn't looking. I nodded. He'd learn eventually that apologies don't stop injustice. They just acknowledge it. The late afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped outside for the last time as a TechCore employee. The parking lot stretched before me, filled with cars belonging to people who'd already forgotten my name. I loaded my boxes into my trunk and sat in the driver's seat, engine off, staring at the building I'd given everything to save. Humiliation tastes metallic, like blood from biting your tongue to keep from screaming. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered across the previous 6 months like breadcrumbs I'd been too loyal to notice. It started with the meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. Strategy sessions about system upgrades that suddenly happened without my input. Marcus would mention decisions already made, speaking to me with the tone reserved for people being managed out gracefully. Then came Raina's increasing presence at the office. She'd appear at company events, always at Marcus's side, asking questions that revealed her complete ignorance of what TechCore actually did. But she asked with confidence, as if ignorance were a leadership quality. "Why do we need so many redundancy layers?" she'd asked once during a presentation I was giving on infrastructure resilience. "Seems inefficient. Can't we just use cloud backup?" The executives had laughed politely, as if she'd made a joke. She hadn't. She genuinely didn't understand the difference between consumer-grade cloud storage and enterprise-level disaster recovery architecture. I'd explained patiently, watching her eyes glaze over after the first technical sentence. Marcus had cut me off halfway through. "Let's keep this high level, Leonard. Not everyone needs the engineering deep dive." Translation: "Stop making my wife look uninformed." The final warning came 3 weeks before my termination. Marcus called me into his office, the expansive corner suite his father had occupied, now redecorated in minimalist black and chrome. "Leonard, I need your documentation on the neural framework. Complete system architecture, access protocols, authentication procedures, everything." My instincts screamed danger. "That's highly sensitive information. What's this for?" "Succession planning," he said smoothly. "We need to ensure business continuity. You understand." I understood that he was preparing to replace me, but I also understood leverage. "Of course," I'd replied. "I'll prepare a comprehensive transition document." I did prepare documentation, detailed, technical, entirely accurate, and completely useless without the context only I possessed. The kind of documentation that looks thorough but leads nowhere without the unwritten knowledge accumulated over 23 years. Marcus accepted it with a satisfied nod, believing he'd secured what he needed. He hadn't. You can't document instinct. You can't write down pattern recognition earned through thousands of critical decisions. You can't transfer the muscle memory of a system you built neuron by neuron. But I let him believe he had everything, because arrogance makes people sloppy. And I needed him sloppy. The neural framework began rejecting commands 72 hours after my departure. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious, too easily attributed to sabotage. Instead, failures cascaded through the system like hairline fractures in glass, invisible until pressure mounted. It started in Singapore, where a routine system update failed authentication. The IT team assumed it was a local network issue and scheduled a retry. The retry failed. Then another. By the fourth attempt, error logs were filling with rejection codes no one recognized. In London, financial reconciliation software that had run flawlessly for 8 years suddenly couldn't verify transaction authenticity. Millions of dollars in client payments sat in digital limbo, neither processed nor declined, just suspended. TechCore's help desk began receiving calls, first dozens, then hundreds. Field offices across 4 continents reported the same issue. Critical operations requiring system authentication were failing with cryptic error messages. Authentication required primary credential validation. Failed security protocol. Breach detected, unauthorized signature attempt system. Integrity compromised. Reverting to safe mode. Raina's first executive decision was to ignore the warnings. From what I heard through former colleagues still willing to talk, she'd called an emergency meeting and declared the issues temporary technical hiccups that IT would resolve. She ordered the technical teams to override the authentication requirements. "Just push through the errors," she'd said. "We can't let minor bugs disrupt operations." But the neural framework wasn't designed to be overridden. Every forced bypass triggered defensive protocols that locked down additional systems. What Raina perceived as solving problems was actually metastasizing them. By the end of the first week, TechCore had lost access to 40% of its operational capacity. Client portals displayed error screens. Automated processes halted mid-execution. The seamless technology infrastructure that had been TechCore's competitive advantage was transforming into a maze of dead ends and locked doors. Marcus finally called me on day 9. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. I listened to each message, hearing the progression from irritation to confusion to barely concealed panic. "Leonard, we're experiencing some system irregularities. Nothing serious, but your expertise would be valuable. Call me back." Then, "Leonard, this is becoming urgent. We need your help understanding these authentication protocols." Finally, "God damn it, Leonard, pick up the phone. I know you're getting these messages." I deleted each voicemail without responding. Silence, I'd learned, communicates more than words ever could. By the 3rd week, TechCore's crisis had leaked to the press. A tech journalist with sources inside the company published an article titled "TechCore's Infrastructure Meltdown: What Happens When You Fire the Architect." The article was devastating in its accuracy. It detailed how a recently departed senior engineer had built critical dependencies into TechCore's systems, and how removing that engineer had triggered cascading failures across the global network. Marcus issued a statement denying any connection between my departure and the technical issues. TechCore's infrastructure is robust and well documented. Current challenges stem from a planned system migration, not personnel changes. The stock market didn't believe him. TechCore's share price dropped 18% in a single day. Major clients began making noise. A Fortune 100 manufacturer threatened to invoke breach of contract clauses if service wasn't restored within 48 hours. A healthcare network serving 12 million patients demanded immediate answers about data security. A financial services firm placed TechCore on probationary status, halting a planned expansion worth $300 million. Reina's response was to hire outside consultants, a prestigious Silicon Valley firm known for digital transformation projects. They arrived with the confidence of people charging $2,000 per hour, conducted interviews, examined documentation, and delivered their assessment in a 90-page report. The conclusion: TechCore's systems were architecturally sound, but operationally compromised by undocumented dependencies requiring specific credential authentication that no longer exists within the organization. Translation: Leonard built it, and only Leonard can fix it. The consultants recommended a complete system rebuild, estimated timeline of 18 to 24 months, projected cost of $400 million, and guaranteed disruption to all business operations during the transition. Marcus rejected the recommendation. TechCore didn't have 18 months. They barely had 18 days before major contracts started canceling. That's when Reina made her fatal mistake. She authorized a forced system override, instructing the IT department to break through the authentication barriers by any means necessary. The teams worked for 60 straight hours, deploying every hacking technique they knew. They managed to breach the first layer of security protocols. For 6 glorious hours, it looked like victory. Systems came back online, transactions processed. Reina sent a company-wide email celebrating the breakthrough. Then, the neural framework's defensive subroutines activated. What I'd built wasn't just a security system, it was an immune response. When the framework detected unauthorized intrusion, it didn't just lock down, it began systematically isolating compromised sections to prevent the infection from spreading. But Reina's team had breached the core authentication layer. The framework interpreted this as total system compromise. Its response was proportional. Complete lockdown of all connected infrastructure. Every TechCore system worldwide went dark simultaneously. Client portals, internal databases, communication networks, financial systems, supply chain management, disaster recovery, backups. All of it shut down within 90 seconds. The silence was absolute. 2,000 employees stared at blank screens, unable to access anything. Not email, not file servers, not even the badge readers that controlled building access. TechCore had just experienced the corporate equivalent of a cardiac arrest, and Reina had triggered it herself. The emergency board meeting happened at 2 in the morning. I know because Miranda Frost, a board member I'd worked with for 15 years, called me personally. "Leonard, you need to hear this. Marcus is trying to blame you for sabotage. He's claiming you deliberately planted time bombs in the system." I wasn't surprised. Desperate men always blame others. "What's the board's position?" I asked. "Divided. Half think you're a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. The other half think Marcus is an incompetent idiot who fired the one person who knew how anything worked." She paused. "I'm in the second group, for what it's worth." "What do you need from me?" "The truth. Did you sabotage TechCore's systems?" I chose my words carefully. "I built security protocols designed to protect TechCore from unauthorized system modifications. Those protocols are functioning exactly as intended. The fact that Reina and Marcus don't have proper authorization isn't sabotage. It's architecture." Miranda was silent for a long moment. "They're going to offer you anything to fix this. You know that, right?" "I know." "What do you want, Leonard?" What did I want? 23 years back? My daughter's childhood? My marriage? None of those were available. "I want them to understand what they destroyed," I finally said. "I want them to face consequences for treating people like disposable resources." That's not an answer to my question. It's the only answer I have right now. The call ended. I sat in my home office, The same room where I'd spent countless nights coding while my family slept and waited for the inevitable. Marcus called it 4:30 in the morning. I answered on the first ring. "Leonard." His voice was stripped of its usual authority. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "This situation has gotten out of hand. The board is concerned about the company's stability. We need your help resolving these technical issues." "These aren't technical issues, Marcus. They're consequences. Don't play games. Name your price. You want your job back? It's yours. Want Raina gone? Consider it done. Equity, board seat, just tell me what you want." The desperation was palpable. TechCore was hemorrhaging value by the hour. Every minute of downtime cost millions. Client relationships built over decades were evaporating. Competitors were circling like sharks scenting blood. "What I want," I said slowly, "is for you to publicly acknowledge what you did. Not some corporate PR statement, the truth." "Fine, whatever. I'll issue a statement. Not to the press, to the employees. I want you to gather everyone who watched you, humiliate me, and tell them the truth, that you fired me to give your wife my job, that you didn't understand the systems I'd built, and that your arrogance nearly destroyed the company." Silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear his pride wrestling with necessity. "And if I do this, you'll fix the systems? If you do this, I'll consider it." "Consider it? Leonard, the company is dying." "Then you better start being honest about who killed it." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the strange exhilaration of finally having power in a situation where I'd always been powerless. Marcus held the company meeting 18 hours later. By then, TechCore's stock had plummeted 47%. 3 major clients had officially terminated contracts. The board had initiated emergency protocols to prevent a complete collapse. I wasn't there in person, but half a dozen former colleagues sent me video clips recorded on their phones. I watched Marcus stand before the assembled company, his face haggard, his expensive suit looking somehow cheaper. "I need to address the current crisis and my role in creating it," he began, reading from notes he kept glancing at. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision to replace Leonard Whitford as head of systems architecture. I made this decision without fully understanding the technical implications." His pause felt like a confession booth. The room was silent. "I gave his position to my wife, Raina, who lacks the technical expertise this role requires. I did this because..." He stopped, looking physically pained. "Because I believed leadership was about vision rather than understanding. I was wrong." Someone in the crowd actually gasped. Marcus Brent admitting he was wrong was unprecedented. Leonard Whitford built the systems that run this company. He spent 23 years creating infrastructure we took for granted. When I fired him, I dismissed his warnings about system dependencies. I ignored his expertise. I prioritized my personal interests over the company's welfare. Raina wasn't in the room. According to the videos, she'd been notably absent from the office for 3 days. "The current system failures are a direct result of my decision to remove Leonard without proper transition planning. This isn't sabotage. This is consequence. The systems are doing exactly what Leonard designed them to do, protecting TechCore from unauthorized changes." Marcus looked directly at the camera then, as if he knew I'd be watching. "Leonard, if you're seeing this, I'm asking for your help. Not as an employer to an employee, but as someone who recognizes he destroyed something valuable through arrogance and ignorance. Whatever you want, whatever it takes, please help us fix this." The video ended. I sat back in my chair, feeling nothing like triumph. Just a hollow awareness that revenge, when it finally arrives, tastes nothing like you imagined. My phone rang again. Miranda Frost. "Did you watch it?" she asked. I did. "The board has authorized me to negotiate terms for your return. Full reinstatement, executive level, equity package, whatever you want. We need you, Leonard." "And Raina?" "Resigned this morning, or was asked to resign. Depends on who's telling the story." I thought about my daughter, now in college, who I'd barely spoken to in months. I thought about my ex-wife, who'd stopped answering my calls years ago. I thought about the life I'd sacrificed to build something Marcus had destroyed with casual cruelty. I'll fix the systems, I said. But I'm not coming back. Leonard, I'll write the protocols to transfer authentication to new administrators. I'll document everything properly this time. I'll stabilize the infrastructure and establish proper redundancies. But I'm done giving my life to companies that see employees as interchangeable parts. What will you do? Good question. I was 52 years old. Financially secure from my severance and stock options, and for the first time in 23 years, I had no obligation to anyone but myself. I'm going to have dinner with my daughter, I said, and maybe figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my work. I returned to TechCore as a contractor, not an employee. The distinction mattered to me, even if no one else understood why. Contractors have boundaries. Employees sacrifice them. The neural framework welcomed me back like a sleeping giant recognizing its creator. Within hours, I'd re-established authentication protocols and begun the systematic restoration of locked systems. It wasn't quick. Damage this extensive couldn't be repaired overnight. But it could be repaired. That was the point Raina and Marcus had missed. I'd never intended to destroy TechCore. I'd built safeguards to protect it from destruction, even when that destruction came from within. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked 12-hour days rebuilding what had been broken. I also built something new, comprehensive documentation and transition protocols that would allow others to maintain the systems after I left. Not because TechCore deserved it, but because the 2,000 employees who'd done nothing wrong didn't deserve to lose their jobs. I trained a team of 5 senior engineers, people I'd mentored over the years, who actually cared about understanding rather than just controlling. I transferred authentication credentials gradually, testing each handoff to ensure stability. I built redundancies so no single person could ever again hold the company hostage, intentionally or otherwise. Marcus kept his distance during this period. We communicated through intermediaries. He signed every check without question, approved every resource request immediately. The board had made clear that his continued employment depended on my success. Raina, I heard, had taken a position at her father's real estate development company. She'd posted on social media about exciting new opportunities and choosing family. The comments were unanimously supportive because no one on social media knew the truth. On my final day as a contractor, Miranda Frost invited me to lunch. We sat in the same restaurant where I'd celebrated my 10-year anniversary at TechCore, back when I'd still believed loyalty mattered. The board wants to offer you a permanent position, she said over appetizers neither of us touched. Chief Technology Officer, full C-suite authority, name your compensation. I'm finishing next week, then I'm done. Leonard, we need you. You need the systems I built. You don't need me. The team I trained is competent. The documentation is thorough. TechCore will survive without me. Is this about revenge? Making us suffer? I shook my head. It's about realizing that 23 years of my life were spent building someone else's dream while my own life crumbled. I'm not angry anymore, Miranda. I'm just tired of being someone I don't recognize. She nodded slowly, understanding in a way Marcus never would. What will you do? My daughter invited me to visit her at college. I haven't seen her campus yet, haven't met her friends, don't know what she's studying or what she wants from life. I smiled, the first genuine smile in months. I'm going to start there. 6 months later, TechCore's stock had recovered to 80% of its pre-crisis value. Marcus remained CEO, though his authority had been significantly curtailed by a board that no longer trusted his judgment. The company had survived, wounded, but functional. Raina divorced Marcus 3 months after her resignation. The settlement was reportedly generous. She started a lifestyle blog about finding yourself after corporate burnout. It had 43 followers. I was sitting in a coffee shop near my daughter's university when I saw the news alert. TechCore announces major restructuring. Founder's son steps down as CEO. The article detailed Marcus's voluntary departure to pursue other interests, and the board's decision to hire an external CEO with actual technical expertise. Reading between the lines, I understood. The board had finally done what should have been done years ago. My daughter slid into the seat across from me, her laptop bag hitting the table with familiar carelessness. She was studying computer science, a choice that had surprised me until she'd explained, "I want to understand what you spent your life building, not to follow your path, but to understand why it mattered so much." "Did you see the news?" I asked, showing her my phone. She glanced at the headline and shrugged. Marcus was always an idiot. Took them long enough to figure it out. Her casual dismissal made me laugh. She was right, of course. Some truths are obvious to everyone except those desperate not to see them. "Are you going back?" she asked. "They'll probably ask." "No, I'm exactly where I want to be." She smiled, and in that moment, I saw something I'd missed during all those years of distraction. She'd grown into someone remarkable, strong, and clear-eyed, and entirely herself, without me there to influence or interfere. "Good," she said, "because I was hoping you'd help me with a project. I'm building a distributed authentication system for my senior thesis, and I need someone who actually knows what they're doing to review my architecture." I opened her laptop, scanning the preliminary code she'd written. It was rough but showed promise. Real promise. The kind of thinking that comes from natural talent rather than forced ambition. "This is good," I said, meaning it, "but you've got a vulnerability here in the encryption handshake." For the next 2 hours, we worked together, father and daughter finally speaking the same language. Not about sacrifice or loyalty or corporate politics, but about the pure problem-solving that had drawn me to this field decades ago before ambition had corrupted it. When we finally closed the laptop, the coffee shop was nearly empty. The afternoon had disappeared into equations and logic trees and the comfortable silence of shared focus. "Thanks, Dad," she said, packing up her things. "Same time next week?" "I'll be here." She left, and I sat alone with my cold coffee, watching students hurry past the windows toward futures they couldn't yet imagine. My phone buzzed, an email from TechCore's new CEO, requesting a consultation on long-term infrastructure planning. I deleted it without responding. Some chapters close not with dramatic finality, but with the quiet recognition that you've already moved on. TechCore would survive or fail on its own merits. Marcus would rebuild his reputation or fade into comfortable obscurity. Raina would find new ways to leverage connections into unearned positions. None of it mattered to me anymore. What mattered was the appointment in my calendar for next week. Another afternoon with my daughter, building something together, not because a company demanded it, but because we chose to. That, I'd finally learned, was the only architecture worth investing in. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but that's not quite right. Revenge is a fire that burns out quickly, leaving nothing but ash and the lingering smell of smoke. What I experienced wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. Marcus and Raina believed they could extract value without understanding its source. They thought leadership meant control rather than responsibility. They learned, in the most expensive way possible, that systems built on foundations you don't respect will eventually collapse. The final tally, reported in various business journals over the following months, was staggering. TechCore lost $3.7 billion in market valuation during the crisis. 40% of that value never recovered. Careers ended, partnerships dissolved, trust evaporated. But those were just numbers on screens, abstractions of human cost. The real toll was measured differently. In the junior developer who lost his retirement savings when stock options became worthless, in the administrative assistant laid off during cost-cutting measures, in the thousands of small tragedies that ripple out from executive arrogance. I couldn't fix those. All I could do was ensure the weight of consequence landed where it belonged. Sometimes justice doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like a man sitting in a coffee shop, helping his daughter debug code, finally understanding that the most important systems we build aren't made of software. They're made of time spent with people who matter, of choices that honor what's real rather than what's expedient, of knowing when to fight and when to simply walk away. Marcus replaced me with his wife. The company nearly collapsed. I restored what could be restored and left the rest behind. That's not a victory or a defeat. It's just the truth, written in the language that matters most. The life you choose to live after the illusions burn away. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or invisible, share your experience in the comments. Hit like if you believe competence matters more than connections. Subscribe for more stories about people who built empires in silence and walked away with dignity. Because sometimes the quietest exits echo the loudest.